just a memory, her and her fabled light. When I close my eyes, sometimes I dare to dream, but I'm sure nobody cares for me. No one's there with me in the darkness. In the darkness. Sometimes I'm howling to hear it echo back. The clutch is like some ancient road toward off the black. When the wolves join in, I hold my breath and shake, 'cause I'm sure nobody cares for me. No one's there with me in the darkness. In the darkness. In the darkness. Sure nobody cares for me. No one's there. But now I'm standing here with me decorated up in, staring up. I feel my legs give way. Oh, I feel a ghostly kiss. I hear the hidden stars sing out the one true meaning, just singing that you care for me and you're there with me in the darkness. But I'm always running scared in the darkness. Could it be you really there in the darkness? It's more than I could ever dare to dream that you would care for me. But you're there with me in the darkness. In the darkness. Do you care for me? Are you there in the
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Catalyst. My name is JR. I'm the teaching pastor here. And we are going to be talking about grief and grieving today. We started singing about being in the darkness. And so I just kind of wanted to rip the Band-Aid off right away here at the start and talk about where you're going to hear the worst theology of all time, all the time, and that's at funerals. If you've ever, I think probably most of us have experienced losing someone that we love, and we've had to stand in that receiving line as people shuffle past, and they say well-intentioned but truly heinous things, in theory, I think, to try to make us feel better, right? They say things like, everything happens for a reason, as though there's some reason that could explain why we hurt so bad and make it okay, right? It's the same thing with like, well, God has a plan, as though God made up a plan that would involve causing us pain, or God just needed another angel in heaven. Again, like what kind of God doesn't have enough angels and so decides to take someone from us who means so much to us so that he could have like one more? That's a horrible kind of God, right? And I think we're being really honest, probably, and at least I have, we've all been standing on the other side of that line, shuffling past, being faced with someone else's grief, and we found those things coming out of our mouths, right? I think we say those kinds of things because when we are faced with grief, we don't know what to say. We don't know what to do to make those people stop hurting, to make them feel better. And it's coming from a good place, right? We want them to feel better. And we don't know what to do, so we just kind of say something, and it's probably something that someone said to us when we were hurting, and it didn't make us feel better then, it doesn't make them feel better now, we just kind of keep doing it. The same thing happens when there's some kind of tragedy or disaster, right? Like when the hurricanes hit, there were all kinds of people who were hopping on social media and trying to say things like, we change our profile pictures so that we felt like we did something, or we make some kind of a post, or we find some Christian who tells us that this is what God did and why, so that makes us feel better, so that, again, we can kind of just try to get away from the pain of the devastation that really honestly kind of seems to be beyond explanation. Because pain and suffering make us so deeply uncomfortable. And again, in a time like this, when we're gathering, we're just kind of considering things, it's pretty easy to see why that doesn't work. But in the moment, we don't really know what else to do. And so today we're going to talk about how we approach grieving, both when we are the person who is grieving and when we're the person who's the friend who's coming alongside someone who's grieving, who's kind of having to stand on the other side of that line. And what we're going to see is that the road to true healing, that thing that we're all trying to get towards, actually begins when we simply be with that other person. When we don't try to explain, when we don't try to answer, when we don't try to fix, but then when we simply face the awkwardness of that pain, and we just choose to be with the person who is grieving, that's when we actually find the most hope and the most healing, and that's exactly what God does for us when we are in pain. So we're going to begin this morning by singing, by calling out to God, by reminding each other of God's faithfulness, and by calling out to God to be faithful with us. So would you stand and sing with us as we can worship together today?
Like the rushing wind, would you breathe impossible and holy. Kings become fools for you, kingdoms to ruins for you. Paper finds ground in you, music finds sound in you. Everything rising, everything rising, everything rising, everything rising, everything rising. Sing. Come like dawn, like waves, like sunlight, bring this world to life. Come like rain, like wind, like springtime, bring this world to Let's pray together. Father, we are grateful for your holiness, Lord, the display of your holiness.
Even as we look at the dew on the ground, the frost that turns into vapor with the rising sun. Lord, these are all beautiful images, visuals of your creation and your greatness and your holiness. And we lift you up this morning in praise together as a body. understand that part of life is grief. Part of life is trying to push through the pain. Lord, and I ask that you'd give us the courage to sit in that pain and to listen to what we are to learn. Lord, that we might find our strength and our comfort in you, in the hope that you give. Lord, we love you and we ask all these things in the name of your Son. Amen.
Thanks, everyone. You can have a seat. As we are continuing to worship this morning, I just wanted to take a couple of moments to call your attention to this little guy we call the Beaker Mini. Everything here at Catalyst with a beaker on it means it's got info we want you to know. So if you didn't grab one on the way and grab one on the way out, there's some stuff in there. A couple things. First of all, I want to say thank you to all of you who helped out with Trunk or Treat last night. I was not able to be there. By the time Chick-fil-A scheduled with us, I had something else that I couldn't move. And I just want to say I'm so proud to be a part of a church where the body takes ownership for the ministry of the church. I know plenty of places, I've been parts of churches where if the pastor wasn't going to be there, then they just wouldn't do it. And that's just never been Catalyst. That's never been how Catalyst is. And I'm so thankful for your commitment and love to the community and showing your love for them. And again, Trunk or Treat is just an easy, awesome opportunity for us to extend love to our community by creating a safe space for the kids to come and get a bunch of candy. And so thank you to all of you who are able to help out with that. I'm so grateful for you. And by way of announcement, I just kind of wanted to talk about what's on the walls in here and what's coming up in this series that we've begun. The art is by a local Dallas artist named Katie Fisher, and she has been working for a couple of years on creating art that engages the Book of Lamentations, which is what we're going to be moving through for the next 5 weeks as we continue through this series. And so when we were putting this together, we reached out to her, and she graciously agreed to host her art. So this is actually the first place that any of this has been displayed for the public. So we have a tremendous opportunity to engage her art. And so if like me, you're not like a super artsy person, let me just tell you, like, these kinds of pieces are not designed to, just kind of like snap a photo of and go on about your day or whatever. They're designed to sort of sit with and to take in and process. And so throughout this series, as we move through the Book of Lamentations, as we talk about the process of lamenting and what that looks like in our lives, make some time. That can be if you want to come in a few minutes early and spend some time with the pieces, if you want to hang around after either of the gatherings and kind of spend some time with the different pieces. There are some little cards by them that explain which chapter of the book they're out of and kind of what she was working with. So just make some extra time to be with these and to kind of engage them and let them speak with you about what we're working through. And then also at the end of this series, we're going to have a very special evening event. We don't usually do a lot of stuff like this, but we thought this would be a good series to start with, because as we're talking about lamenting and grieving, for the most part, in here on Sunday mornings, we're going to be talking about what that looks like at an individual level, but all of this stuff applies at a cultural level too. And so we're going to spend, 6 weeks total, counting last week, working through all of this stuff about lamenting and about grieving. And then at the end of the series, on Sunday, December 3rd, we are going to have an evening where we gather together and have a panel of some friends who are up here, some people from Catalyst, some people from outside Catalyst, and we're going to talk about race in our culture. It's a very divisive issue. It's one that's caused a lot of grief. I think people have lost some friends over it, and we know that as a culture, we're kind of at a significant moment. And so in order to be a people who engages race well and who speaks about race well, we're going to apply all of the things that we're talking about with the process of lamenting and what it looks like to be reoriented in new ways of thinking. We're going to apply all of that to the issue of race on that evening. So we're really excited about it. We think it's going to be a challenging evening, but in the best possible way, in a way that will prepare us as a people, so that as our country continues to have this conversation about race, we will be a holy voice in that. When we be a people who speaks life and who speaks hope and who helps our country and our culture come to terms and engage in healthy and holy ways with race. So again, that's Sunday night, December 3rd. Go ahead and put that on your calendars. We'll have more details about that coming as we move through the series. Also, there's a tear-off on here, and there's a spot on this tear-off that says, I need prayer for. If there's anything that is going on in your life that we as your Catalyst church family could join you in prayer over, we would be honored to do that. So you can just write that down on the line there, tear it off, stick it in the box by the door on your way out, and we'll email it out. If you want prayer, but you don't want it emailed out to a bunch of people, and you mark the box that says this is confidential, then only our pastors will see that, as our pastoral team can be praying with you, okay? We like to tear this off all at the same time, so I'm going to count to 3. If you'll get it ready. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. Very good. And kids, that means it's time for you to head back to the lab. Thank you so much for being in here with us and for singing with us. They're going to go back and hear the good news about Jesus in language that is right at their level, same thing we do for us in here. So thank you, kids. Thank you to our amazing lab leaders for all you do for them as well. Thank you so much. And as they're leaving, I want to invite you to pass peace with me. This is something that we do every week here at Catalyst, because we know that peace comes out of the world from God, but we believe it comes through us, that God sends us into the world as peacemakers. So each week we greet each other, we offer each other peace in the name of Jesus as a way of remembering that we go back into the world to make peace in the name of Jesus. So would you stand as we continue to worship, greet some people around you, offer them peace. Oh my. So the series that we're in right now, I've already talked about it a little bit, but it's called Good Grief, and we're looking at what we do when we hit those times of tragedy, when we hit those times of pain, how we grieve. And if you were here last week, Tim Basselin began talking with us. He worked through one of the Psalms of Lament, and he introduced us to this process that we find in the scriptures of lamenting, of lamentation. And it's a way to move through the process of grief such that it leads us towards hope and healing. And so the process of lamenting, or the shape of what lamenting looks like, is it assumes that we all start in a place of what the theologian Walter Brueggemann calls orientation. And that's just like how we are in the world. Like we have a certain set of expectations about how the world is, we have a certain set of relationships, and they just help us function in the world. We're oriented in a particular way in the world. And then something happens. Maybe a relationship ends. Maybe you lose a job. Maybe you lose a loved one. Maybe there's some kind of tragedy that strikes. Something happens that disorients us. It shakes us out of the familiar. It shakes us out of the ordinary. And it makes us question sometimes everything. We feel lost. We feel like, our GPS just lost signal and we're in downtown Dallas and we just really don't have any clue how to get out of that maze of streets down there, right? You feel like you don't know where to go. You feel like you don't know what to do. You feel disoriented. And lament is how we move through that process of disorientation to a place of reorientation, where we have a new set of a new understanding about the world, a new process, a new set of expectations, a new relationship to God, a new relationship to other people. We're reoriented in a way that's actually more healthy, in a way that's actually better, in a way that helps us function better than we did before in the old place of orientation. But we can only reach that place of reorientation if we engage in the process of lament, which most of us don't want to do. Most of us, when we are disoriented, we want to medicate that, right? Because it hurts. So we want to do things or sometimes take things that make that pain less. We want to avoid, again, that's why we just sort of spit platitudes and leave, because that's easier than facing pain. Like it's very uncomfortable to be in a place of disorientation. It's very uncomfortable to be with someone who is in a place of disorientation, right? Because we don't know how to fix it. And a lot of times what we would love to do is kind of go back to the way things were, to the place of orientation, but the whole point of that kind of massive trauma is that you can't go back, right? You just can't restore things to the way they used to be. And so that pain oftentimes can cause us to medicate, to avoid, to kind of throw platitudes at it until it goes away. And that actually prevents us from getting to a place of reorientation. So, in order to heal, in order to find hope, we really need to engage in the process of lament. So that's what we're going to be talking about for the next few weeks, is what that process looks like. And it's not linear. It's not like I can say, here's step A, and it lasts this many days. And then you go to step B, and it's this many days. There's no timeline, there's no chart for this kind of thing, but we can observe some of the features of it, and some of the things to expect, and some of the ways to engage those things. So that's kind of what we're going to be doing. So I want to begin by talking about what lament is and how it functions. So I have a quote here from a pastor theologian named Soong-Chan Rah. He has this fantastic book called The Prophetic Lament that's actually all about the kind of stuff that we're going to be talking about. And here's what he says about lament. He says, lament in the Bible is a liturgical response to the reality of suffering and engages God in the context of pain and trouble. The hope of lament is that God would respond to human suffering that is wholeheartedly communicated through lament. So there's a couple things that I want to note. First of all, is that he says lament is a liturgical thing. Now what that means is that lament is, in the Bible, lament is something that's designed to be done together. All of the lament things that we have in the Bible, the Psalms of Lament, the Book of Lamentations, all these places where we see lament, they're not some sad person sitting in their room writing emo poetry, right? That's not what lament is. These are songs and poems that were created to be used in a worship context. So lament is liturgical. It's something that's designed for us all to get together and do together. Now, that is not why people come to church, right? People come to church because they're sad and they want to feel better. But lament says, no, we're going to come and feel bad together, right? So this again, at least for American Christianity, this is a very difficult thing for us to do because we have been taught our whole lives that this is a place that fixes whatever feels gross inside of you, right? And there's plenty of people, I've been a pastor long enough to know plenty of people who explicitly will say that I go to church for a pick-me-up. Right? I go to church because I've had a hard week and I need just a little shot of Jesus juice to get back out there and do it all again next week. And lament doesn't do that. Lament says that doesn't really work. And lament insists that we do come together, but that when we come together, it's not about necessarily trying to ignore those problems. It's not about offering those easy platitudes that make us feel better, because then we just go back out, and once we're back out there, we just feel bad again. Right? And so lament says there's got to be something better than that. And lament challenges us to make sure that our faith has room for lament. A third of all of the Psalms in the Songbook, there's 150 of them. It's like 50-ish of the songs of the Hebrew people are songs of lament. Now, that's not most of them, right? This is also not a thing where it says, like, when you come to church, you should always feel bad. It's not that either. It's just saying, like a third of the time, that the Hebrew people were singing songs to God, they were these songs of crying out. They were these songs of lament. Do we have room in our Christianity? Do we have room in our faith for lament? Is this something that we create intentional space for? And we have to create intentional space because it doesn't feel good, right? So if we just left it up to how we want to feel, of course we want to feel good, right? We don't want to feel bad. And so we have to create intentional space, and lament helps us to do that. It insists that this is a part of what it means to be the people of God. This is a part of what a healthy, robust, flourishing faith looks like. It's not just puppy dogs and rainbows all the time, right? It also has room for pain and for suffering and for this sort of honest emotion, okay? Rah goes on. I want to finish this quote. He says, lament is an act of protest, as the lamenter is allowed to express indignation and even outrage about the experience of suffering. The lamenter talks back to God and ultimately petitions him for help in the midst of pain. The one who laments can call out to God for help, and in that outcry, there is the hope and even the manifestation of praise. Lament is an act of protest. It's standing up in front of God and saying, hey, are you paying attention? This is not supposed to be happening. Now, some of you just got very uncomfortable because you're not supposed to talk back to your elders, right? And God's elder, that counts, right? And just the idea that you can like somehow protest to God or like talk back to God or tell God that God's not doing something that God said he would do, that feels that feels like we're in danger of smiting, right? Like we've entered the lightning zone. But when you lament, what you are doing is you are naming a gap that you perceive between the way things are, the reality that you're living in, and the way things are supposed to be. Right? You're naming that gap. Lament is naming the gap between the way things are and the way you know they're supposed to be. But the promises that God has made, right? The ways that God has said, if you follow me, you'll flourish, you'll have life. And you say, well, I'm doing that, and it's not happening. What's the deal? You're protesting. And in that act of protest, there is a faithfulness, because when we are protesting, we are insisting that we believe that God is faithful to his promises, so something must be wrong. See, if we just thought God was some sort of like capricious deity that sort of did whatever he wanted, and we just sort of had to like serve him and keep our fingers crossed and hope for the best, then when bad things happen, we couldn't get mad about it. We'd just be like, well, I drew the short straw this week. Like, tough cookies, right? You wouldn't be able to lament. There'd be no space for that because God never made any promises of faithfulness or flourishing. But because we have those promises, because we believe that God is faithful, because we believe that God's way does lead to life, then when we experience trauma and suffering, we cry out and we say, hey, what's going on? Why is this happening? This is not the way things are supposed to be. That's lament. Lament is remembering that God is faithful, and that's what you'll see again and again and again in the Psalms of Lament. They're constantly talking about the Exodus or talking about all of these great heroes of the Bible and saying, remember how God was faithful to all of them? And then they're doing that because they're saying, what about me? You did it for Abraham. You did it for Moses. You did it for Gideon. You did it for all the, what about me? Hello? That's lament. We're remembering that God is faithful, and then we're calling out to God to be faithful to us. That's what lament is. That's the shape of lament. So that brings us to the book of Lamentations. If you have a Bible, go ahead and turn with me to Lamentations chapter 1, which is where we're going to be today. Or you can click over there on your smart devices, whatever. If you grab one of the free Bibles out of the back, you can find Lamentations 1 on 486. If you don't own a Bible, please keep that one considered a gift from us. As you're turning to Lamentations 1, Lamentations is a series of poems that was written in the wake of an event that we call the exile. Now, a little bit of history for you. The exile is an event where the Babylonian Empire descended upon the nation of Judah, God's people, and utterly destroyed them. Tore down their walls, destroyed God's temple, deported most of the elite of the culture, the religious, political, social leaders, took them all back to Babylon with them, and basically left the entire culture gutted and devastated. It's an event we call the exile. Now, before the exile, the people were nervous. They saw this giant empire descending upon them, and they thought, if they get much closer, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. And so in order to keep themselves safe, they started making all of these alliances with all of these other nations, saying, hey, maybe if we all band together, we'll be big enough that we can fight off Babylon. And as all of that was happening, there were several of God's prophets among the people who were saying, this is a bad idea. Don't make alliances with all of these other nations. You can't trust them. You can't trust their gods. This is going to end badly. Just stay faithful to Yahweh, and you'll be fine. Yahweh is the only one you need to keep you safe. Quit wasting your time with all these other people. It's not going to end well again and again and again and again. But the people didn't listen. They made all these other alliances. And then it turned out those alliances betrayed them, abandoned them, and Babylon destroyed them. They were completely devastated. And so the book of Lamentations is a series of poems. Most scholars are pretty sure that the author is the prophet Jeremiah, this prophet who was warning everyone not to make these alliances, who lived through the exile and then was not deported to Babylon. So he stays behind in the wreckage of the culture and lives with the devastation, lives with the wreckage. And the book of Lamentations is a series of liturgical poems that he wrote to help the people grieve this loss in this process. Okay, so it's 5 poems, 5 chapters. We're going to just work through them one chapter at a time because they're all self-contained pieces that all kind of have common themes. And in all of the poems, there are 2 primary actors. there is the prophet who is functioning like the friend who comes to the funeral, right? He's sort of removed from the devastation. He's sort of coming in and bearing witness. And then there is the woman. So it's the prophet and the woman. And the woman is the embodiment of the personification of the people of the city. She is Jerusalem. And so she's the person in the receiving line, right? She's the person who has experienced this trauma and is processing it with it. So two actors, the prophet and the woman. And I mean, again, I'm assuming all of us in here at some point have been the woman. Some of us may feel like we're the woman right now. We're in the midst of some kind of a trauma or in the midst of some kind of a devastation. If you're not, well, then certainly we all know someone who is, right? And then that would make us more like the prophet. We're the person who's coming alongside that friend or that loved one who is grieving. And we're looking for how we can help, how we can make a difference. So I think, no matter where you are in your life right now, you can relate to one of these two characters, and at some point in your life, you've probably related to both of them. So we're going to begin in Lamentations 1. And as we read, the prophet is speaking first. And you'll notice as we read through this, he is describing the devastation of the city, and he doesn't offer any platitudes. He doesn't say, don't worry, God has a plan. He doesn't say, well, everything happens for a reason. He doesn't do any of that. He just sort of bears witness. So out of respect for that, I don't want to pick this apart verse by verse or go into all these different, what I just want to do is I'm going to kind of read through it slowly with you. And I just want you to bear witness to it. I want you to think about what you're seeing, what you're smelling, what you're hearing as you're standing here with the prophet, observing the destruction of the city and the devastation of the woman. Okay? So here we go, Lamentations 1. Jerusalem, once so full of people, is now deserted. She who was once great among the nations now sits alone like a widow. Once the queen of all the earth, she is now a slave. She sobs through the night, tears streaming down her cheeks. Among all her lovers, there is no one left to comfort her. All her friends have betrayed her and become her enemies. Judah has been led away into captivity, oppressed with cruel slavery. She lives among foreign nations and has no place of rest. Her enemies have chased her down, and she has nowhere to turn. The roads to Jerusalem are in mourning, for crowds no longer come to celebrate the festivals. The city gates are silent, her priests groan, her young women are crying, how bitter is her fate. Her oppressors have become her masters, and her enemies prosper. For the Lord has punished Jerusalem for her many sins. Her children have been captured and taken away to distant lands. All the majesty of beautiful Jerusalem has been stripped away. Her princes are like starving deer searching for pasture. They are too weak to run from the pursuing enemy. In the midst of her sadness and wandering, Jerusalem remembers her ancient splendor. But now she has fallen to her enemy, and there is no one to help her. Her enemy struck her down and laughed as she fell. Jerusalem has sinned greatly, so she has been tossed away like a filthy rag. All who once honored her now despise her, for they have seen her stripped naked and humiliated. All she can do is groan and hide her face. She defiled herself with immorality and gave no thought to her future. Now she lies in the gutter with no one to lift her out. Okay, we're going to stop there because now the woman starts speaking. We'll come back to that in a second. I'm guessing, as I was reading that, you got very uncomfortable. You thought, I'm going to maybe flip over to the Gospels and read some parables or something, or find a cat video on Facebook. Anything, like literally anything, except for enduring reading this text. It's deeply uncomfortable. We want to avoid, or we want to medicate. We want to do something to turn away from the devastation that the people of God faced, even in this poetic description. But the prophet won't turn away. The prophet beholds the woman. He gazes at this. And he doesn't say anything. That's the other thing, right? We're like, you're a prophet, man. Like, give us some church answers for this, right? Say some things that will make this okay or that will help us understand. But he doesn't. He remains silent. I mean, other than the description, right? He doesn't give us what we want. That's because, again, I just have to emphasize this again, that sense of wrong that we feel when we hear all of that, that's not how things are supposed to be. That sense of wrong is right. Things are not supposed to be that way. God didn't create children to be taken into slavery. Cities were not meant to be destroyed. People were not meant to go hungry. We're not supposed to be afraid all the time, right? That sense of wrong, when you see that, you say, ugh, that is a good sense. And because it's good, we should stay with it. We should sit in it. There is a kind of righteousness in agreeing with God that the way things are is bad. In calling out for some kind of justice, some kind of hope. It's awkward, it's painful, but it's good. It's good to sit there. It's good to stay in it. And Lamentations invites us to sit in it. It invites us to, like the prophet, behold the woman in her pain and not look away, but to stay and to wait for God to move, to wait for God to act, to wait for God to right the thing that is wrong, to wait for God to be faithful the way we know God is supposed to be faithful. Lamentations goes on, and now the woman speaks. O Lord, look, she mourns, and see how I am despised. Does it mean nothing to you, all who pass by? Look around and see if there is any suffering like mine, which the Lord brought on me when he erupted in fierce anger. He has sent fire from the heaven that burns in my bones. He has placed a trap in my path and turned me back. He has left me devastated, racked with sickness all day long. He wove my sins into ropes to hitch me to a yoke of captivity. The Lord sapped my strength and turned me over to my enemies. I am helpless in their hands. The Lord has treated my mighty men with contempt, and at his command a great army has come to crush my young warriors. The Lord has trampled his beloved city like grapes are trampled in a winepress. For all these things I weep. Tears flow down my cheeks. No one is here to comfort me. Any who might encourage me are far away. My children have no future, for the enemy has conquered us. Jerusalem reaches out for help, but no one comforts her. Regarding his people Israel, the Lord has said, let their neighbors be their enemies. Let them be thrown away like a filthy rag. The Lord is right, Jerusalem says, for I rebelled against him. Listen, people everywhere, look upon my anguish and despair, for my sons and daughters have been taken captive to distant lands. I begged from my allies for help, but they betrayed me. My priests and leaders starved to death in the city, even as they searched for food to save their lives. Lord, see my anguish. My heart is broken, and my soul despairs, for I have rebelled against you. In the streets the sword kills, and at home there is only death. The end. The woman names her grief. She gives voice to this sense of abandonment that God has left her, that God is punishing her. And the prophet is with her. The prophet is bearing witness to this, and he doesn't offer any theological insight to her condition. Right? He doesn't say, yeah, you're totally right. God is punishing you. Or he doesn't say, well, now, I think you have a little bit of a theological misunderstanding of how God works and what God's divine punishment looks like. And no, he doesn't do any of that. He just bears witness to her pain. He sits with her. And that's it. The poem ends with no resolution, which again feels just awful. Particularly for people of faith, like we expect these things to at least end with some sort of like, but I trust in God and things are going to work out in the end. Like, give us that at least, right? Minimum. But it doesn't. And I think there's some wisdom in this. When we are faced with grief, when we are in the shoes of the prophet, right, standing with the friend who is grieving, that is not the time to offer answers. Even if they are right, theologically sound answers. Even if we hear them say something that we're like, ooh, I don't know about that, right? This is not the time. Because what the person who is grieving, what the woman needs in that moment is not answers. They need a place to be honest. They need a place to be able to express what is in their hearts. If you've been in the position of the woman, if you've been in that place of grief, sometimes it probably feels like there's not really anyone that you can talk to that you can be really, really, really honest with, who's actually going to sit with your pain and just sort of receive that and share some of that burden with you. And so you end up sort of bottling it up or keeping it inside or feeling like you have to like put on that fake happy face everywhere you go so that everyone quits asking like, how are you? Because you know they don't really want to know. And so if we are to be the people of God, then part of what that means, part of what the scriptures teach us that means, is that we have to have spaces where the woman can be honest without fearing that the prophet's going to come in and say, I heard all the things you said, and I have some notes to offer you. Right? We need to just be able to express this pain, to lament, to say, to agree that this is not the way things are supposed to be, before we can begin the process of trying to fix it or heal it or make it better. Before any of that, we have to be able to be honest and to express that. And that's what Lamentations 1 gives us. It's pure pain. And it's so hard. I mean, I can't tell you how much fun I had writing this sermon and then waiting 4 weeks to preach it, knowing that we were going to have to stand up here and talk about, like, let's just sit in pain for a while, right? Like, it's not fun. I'm sure if you're not having fun, imagine me, right? And yet, again and again and again, when we come to lament in the scripture, this is what we see, that the first movement is honesty. Honesty for the woman and creating a safe place to be honest for the prophet. We don't like to do that. And yet, if we can do that, we really do kind of begin the path to healing. My last church, when I was up in Ohio, I was there when we had a young woman in the church, she was 17, who died in a car accident. Devastated the whole community. She was well loved at the high school and at the church. And they asked me to pray at her funeral. And so I had to stand there near the parents in the receiving line, hearing all of the horrible things that people said as they went by, wishing that I could just like shove them all away and just like hug the parents and say, just shut your ears. And then I had to get up and pray. And so I was like, what sort of words are appropriate in this moment, right? Like what could I possibly say that would take away the pain of this family? Or the pain that frankly all of us were feeling. And so rather than trying to offer any, again, theological wisdom or insight into the problem of evil or whatever, I just was really honest in my prayer. I prayed, I remember specifically, I prayed, God, we know that you didn't create a world where kids are supposed to die. Like, that wasn't the plan. This means that there's something deeply wrong. And that was sort of it. Like, I asked for God's presence and for God's comfort, and I didn't try to offer any answers. And I felt like when I got done with the prayer, I felt very inadequate. Pastorally, as a friend, I thought, well, I kind of did the best I could, and that's just such a far cry from anything that was helpful. And a couple of weeks later, I had another man in the church come up to me and thank me for the prayer, because he and a number of other families who had just been deeply impacted by this loss said that was the moment that they actually began to sort of heal, because I had allowed them in my prayer to be honest. That because I had said, this is not okay, it made them know that it was okay for them to say it was not okay. It made them realize it was okay to lament, to cry out to God, to say, hey, this isn't right. Because again, they were in that sort of church mode where you're not allowed to, you're not allowed to be mad at God. You're not allowed to be mad at the way things are. You're not allowed to say those kinds of things. Because I had done that in my prayer, it sort of opened that space for them. And because they were able to then grieve together, it began to move them towards a place of healing. And friends, this is it. We have to face grief and pain together. Particularly when we're not in a place when we're not the woman, when we are the prophet, we have to make sure that we are a safe people to grieve with. Because when we're the woman, we need a safe place to grieve, right? And we do that by being that together. And we do that because this is the good news for us. That when we were in a place of hopelessness, when we were in a place of devastation, when we were crushed under the weight of our own sins, God did not leave us there. Like the prophet, God came among us, and God came to be with us. Jesus, Emmanuel, God with us, to be with us. And then not only did he sit with us, but he stood in our place. He became the woman for us. He took the pain of grief on us. And even when he was praying in the garden, he was very honest with God, right? I don't want to do this, but if it's your will, I will. And then on the cross praying, my God, why have you forsaken me? This pure, honest lament. Psalm 22, which he is quoting there, is a psalm of lament. And so we can approach the communion table today knowing that God has created space for us to be honest, for us to be open, for us to be real. Because this is the place where Jesus took our sin upon himself, where he became crushed for us so that we could find life. This table invites us to share the meal that Jesus gave to his followers the night before he was killed. When he took bread and broke it, and he said, "This is my body, it's broken for you. Eat it, remember me." When he passed around a cup of wine, and he said, "This wine is the blood of my blood, sorry. This cup is my blood. It's poured out for the forgiveness of sin. Poured out as a new covenant between you and God. Drink it. Remember me." And you don't have to be a member of Catalyst to receive communion with us today. If you are someone who is willing to be honest about your pain, willing to receive others' pain, because we know that by being honest with ourselves and with God, we enter into a place, a journey of healing, a journey that's taking us towards that reorientation. And you're welcome to come forward today. I'm going to lead us through a prayer of examine. I'm going to ask you 4 questions, invite you to reflect on the week that brought you here, and on this, how you're responding to the message today, and then I'll pray for us. So here's the first question. When recently have you sat with the pain of grief or with someone else's pain? When have you faced it? When have you refused to run away from it? Now, when have you rushed to answers or tried to avoid pain? Again, that could be yours, that could be someone else's. Now, how in the next week might you be tempted to avoid pain and grief? And finally, how can you be honest about your pain or someone else's pain this week? How can you create a space for that? All right, let's pray together. God, thank you for this good news that we have heard this morning, that you do not leave us in a place of suffering and anguish, that you are faithful, that we can cry out to you, and know that you hear us and know that you respond. We come to this table this morning because it is a symbol and a sign and a call of your faithfulness to us. We receive these wafers and juice, and we ask that they become a spiritual food that nourishes us, that enables us to be a people of hope, even as we lament together. That we, following in your footsteps, would create spaces for people to grieve together. Thank you for your love for us. Thank you for inviting us to your table. Thank you for showing us the way to your life, even as it goes through the cross. We offer these prayers when we approach your table this morning. In the name of your Son, Jesus.
You're welcome to stand if you're not already, and join us as we sing this last song together.
Take this fainted heart, take these fainted hands, wash me in your love, come like waves again. Even when my strength is lost, I'll praise you. Even when I have no song, I'll praise you. Even when it's hard to find the words louder than I'll sing.
this morning. First of all, thank you, as always, to all of you who are supporting Catalyst financially or through your serving. We are so grateful for your contributing in that way because we're able to do what we do because of you, so thank you for that. Also, if you're a guest with us, I want to say thank you for being here. We hope you felt welcomed and encouraged and challenged here at Catalyst. We know it can be tricky to get connected to a new congregation, and we wanted to make sure that you could do it really easily because we love Catalyst. We think you would love Catalyst. So we created an experience called the Newcomers Lunch. We do them once a month, and they're designed specifically to help you get connected. The next one we do is on November 12th, so here just in a couple weeks. And it's right after our second worship gathering at noon. It's about it's about 45 minutes long. And in that time, we feed you, and we tell you who Catalyst is, and we tell you what God is doing here, and we give you that easy next step to get connected to the congregation. So if you're interested in that, on this next step card, we have a box you can check at the top that says you'd like to get more information about that. You can drop it in the box by the door on your way out, or you can hand it to me. I'd love to say hi. Now, as you're going next week, Lamentations chapter 2 is about God's anger, God's wrath. And so we're going to talk about what that looks like and what we do with it, and believe it or not, actually why it is good news for us. So it should be fun is, again, a weird word to say for that, but I think it will be a helpful and challenging and good, ultimately very good message. So I'm really looking forward to that. As you're going this week, though, again, maybe you are the woman and you need a safe place to grieve. Maybe you, though, are the prophet and there's someone in your life who needs that safe space. As you go, would you just go knowing that avoiding the pain, medicating the pain, ignoring the pain, whether it's your pain or whether it's the pain of someone you love, is never the answer. It's never the way that we heal. It's easy, but it's never good. So would you go having the courage to face that pain, knowing that that brutal, unconstrained, unfiltered honesty is the first step on a road to healing because God is faithful. And when we call out for God to be faithful, God is faithful to respond. So go in the grace and peace of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. We'll see you next week.